In 1944, 33 people, 32 men and 1 woman, were stuck on a small island in the Pacific Ocean, distant from any big landmass. During this unstable period immediately after the end of World War II, people paid little attention to them, leaving them to survive on their own for the next few years. By the time of their rescue in 1951, only 20 soldiers remained. The other 12 were either dead or missing, probably because they were fighting for the only lady in the group. This is the tale of the Anatahan Queen. The United States currently governs the Mariana Islands, a chain of islands. If you want to visit Japan, these are the islands you should go to. Anatahan is the name of one of these islands, and that's where our narrative takes place. The Japanese ruled the Mariana Islands from the end of World War I until the beginning of World War II. During this time, a corporation called Nanyo Kohatsu, which means South Sea Development Company, was working on agricultural development in the area. The South Sea Development Company had a plantation on the island of Anatahan. The plantation manager, Kikuichiro, ran it with the help of his subordinate and the subordinate's wife, Kazuko, as well as a few dozen local workers. The war would eventually reach Anatahan as Japan started to lose ground to the Allies. One day in 1944, after their ship suffered serious damage in battle, a party of 31 men drifted onto the island. The sailors were all young guys, between the ages of 18 and 23. At the time, Kazuko's husband was conducting an errand on another island and couldn't return to Anatahan due to the intense military activity in the area. Kikuichiro pretended to be Kazuko's spouse because he was afraid of what the young men might do to her on this lawless island. He believed that sailors would not harm a married couple. Kazuko, Kikuichiro, and the 32 sailors, together with a few locals, started their lives as castaways on this small piece of land in the Pacific. This island had fertile soil, so they could produce potatoes, catch fish, and sometimes eat rats and lizards that lived there. They would even use the palm trees to manufacture a form of alcohol. For now, they had more than enough to stay alive. Japan gave up to the Allies in the summer of 1945. The Americans would go to this island and use loudspeakers to say the war was over and that anyone still there should give up. The islanders quickly got on the American ships and left the island. But Kikuichiro, Kazuko, and the sailors were not so quick to do so. They were afraid that the Americans would kill them if they gave themselves up, and they didn't want to believe that Japan had lost the war. They had enough food and other things to survive on this island, so they chose to stay alive on Anatahan. At first, Kazuko and Kikuichiro lived apart from the sailors and only talked to them when they had to. But in the summer of 1946, everything changed when one of the sailors found the wreckage of a B-29 bomber, which had probably crashed on the island during the war. He found a gun on the pilot's body, an item that would upset the balance of power. The sailor who found the gun used it to threaten Kikuichiro and said he wanted Kazuko for himself. Kikuichiro had to give in, and the sailor became Kazuko's second husband. However, the second husband would soon end up dead. If you ask different people, they'd all give you different reasons for his death. Kazuko would later say he fell down a cliff, but some of the sailors said Kikuichiro killed the second spouse. Not long after her second husband's death, Kikuichiro also lay dead. The cause of death is unknown. At first, Kazuko said he died from food poisoning after eating a raw crab, but later she changed her story, saying the man who would become her third husband killed Kikuichiro. A man who would later become her fourth husband also killed this third husband. There were also reports going around at this time that Kazuko was sleeping with guys apart from her fake husbands, which was generating problems among the sailors. They began blaming Kazuko for the killings and the violence happening in the group. Kazuko believed it would be safer to surrender to the Americans because she feared that the men would betray her. She stayed in the woods for about a month, hiding from the men and waiting for a ship to come back to the island. In 1950, she finally got off the island on an American ship and returned to Japan. Then, a year later, in the summer of 1951, the last sailors on the island also found their way back to Japan. But it turned out that only 20 men were still alive. There were 32 men to start with, but Kikuichiro and Kazuko's second and third spouses were dead, so there should have been 29 left. What happened to the other 9? The short answer is that we don't really know. Kazuko changed her story multiple times, and her statements did not align with the claims made by the sailors, which I will explain in more detail later. Kazuko learned that her real husband was still alive after she got back to Japan. However, he had married another woman since he thought Kazuko had died during and after the war. Kazuko couldn't return to her husband, so she had to find a way to support herself. She attempted to achieve this by engaging with the media, as many outlets were eager to interview her. Kazuko appeared in numerous newspapers and magazines, and the story of a woman living on an island with a few dozen men spread quickly, giving her a bit of celebrity. She often talked about having relationships with many men and how they fought and even killed each other over her. People are still debating whether these claims were true or if she made them up to attract attention. Many people believed that Kazuko was a powerful woman who survived on an island populated entirely by men. She became known as the Queen of Anatahan. Her story was turned into a play, and Kazuko actually played herself in it. She spent 2 years traveling around Japan, performing in different theaters. She even starred in a full-length movie about her life, again portraying herself. Hollywood later produced a film based on her story, but she did not participate in that production. Kazuko's performances in movie received poor reviews, which was unfortunate because she wasn't a great actress. Around this time, some of the sailors wrote their books about the Queen of Anatahan, sharing their versions of events. One sailor claimed Kazuko tricked the men into giving her food, clothes, and other necessities, then stirred up conflict between them. He said at least 9 men died because of this fighting. Kazuko's poor acting and the sailors' accusations damaged her reputation. At first, people saw her as a brave survivor, but later they viewed her as a wicked woman who manipulated men to get what she wanted. She began to backtrack on her earlier statements about having many relationships, saying she had no choice but to get close to some men to survive, and that only 2 men died fighting over her. She claimed the others had died from famine, food poisoning, or random accidents like falling off cliffs. However, the damage had already occurred, and people began to steer clear of her in the town. She couldn't get a job or appear on TV anymore because her image was so tarnished. Kazuko moved to the countryside to escape the attention. The media frenzy around the Queen of Anatahan eventually died down. We're not very knowledgeable about what happened to Kazuko after that, but she did get married and opened a small restaurant in the country. Kazuko died of a brain tumor in 1971, at the age of 51. Did the Queen of Anatahan actually kill many men to satisfy her greed and pleasure? Or was she simply a victim of her circumstances, doing whatever was necessary to survive on an isolated island surrounded by men? Few people remember the true events that inspired the 2010 movie, which was largely based on Kazuko's story. Most Japanese people have forgotten the Queen of Anatahan's tale. The survivors returned to Japan over 70 years ago. The youngest among them would be in their 90s by now. If any are still alive, they are perhaps the only ones who truly know what happened on Anatahan Island.